Well, every day I see it. People using lanes improperly. Camping in the fast lane, waiting to the last second to get into a turning lane, and merging onto a highway, not at the highway speed. Every day we all see this. But why? We all have to go through driver education. We all have to read the book and understand what each lane means. So why is it after years of driving and no re-education into the system do we use those lanes improperly? Well, a lot of us, besides quickly reading it over to get our driver's license, never follow up or understand. We just automatically make assumptions about what lanes mean and drive our own way. This is the mentality of the average driver. And although we've talked about this before, today we're going to take a look at a multitude of lanes which the average driver doesn't use properly. Welcome back to the AutoLooks podcast. I'm your host, as always, the doctor to the automotive industry, Mr. Everett J, coming to you from our host website at AutoLooks.net. If you haven't been there, stop by, check it out, read some of the reviews, check out some of the ratings, and go to the Corporate Links website page. Big or small, we have them all. Car companies from around the globe, all centralized in one website at AutoLooks.net. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@autolooks.net. And please click the like button at the bottom. Like, share, and follow us for more information from the AutoLooks and AutoLooks podcast. So like I said at the beginning, lanes. There's a multitude of different lanes out there, and a lot of people don't really understand what each lane means. Take, for instance, a standard 2-lane road. Well, both of them are what you would consider auxiliary lanes. You have a speed limit and you must follow it, and you can enter or exit or turn off. That lane is utilized for everything. The unfortunate thing is a lot of people seem to think that that goes with every other lane. Lanes don't have specific purposes. Whatever lane I'm in is the auxiliary lane. No, that's not correct. And when I leave my house, I drive on a 2-lane road, and it takes a while before I finally hit a turning lane, or actually what I hit first is where the highway from 2 lanes breaks into a 4-lane causeway. Yes, a broken 4-lane road with traffic lights on it. So if I'm driving around the speed limit, I must stay over to the right side of the road, because that is what they call the auxiliary lane, or the slow lane in this case, because most of the entering roads have either ramps or they're a controlled access points, which means people could turn on at slow rates onto the highway. So why is it every day when I go into work, I find so many people driving in the left lane? Now, I live in North America, so yes, we drive on the left-hand side of our vehicles, but the right-hand side of the road. So it might be a little different if you're listening to this podcast in many other locations across the globe. But here in North America, when I'm driving in the left lane or the center lane on a 4-lane road, it is what you call a driving lane. Or in this case, for the roadway I'm traveling on, it is the fast lane. Now, this road has been broken apart because traffic now exceeds what is required for a 2-lane road. So we need to have more lanes to move more traffic along. That doesn't mean that every single person is allowed to drive in whatever lane they want. No, the driving lane, or through lane as it's called, is supposed to be where people are moving faster. I'm on a 4-lane road, which means that is technically the passing lane. Slower moving vehicles have to stay in the right side lane. If you're going slower than the flow of traffic in the left lane, you're doing what we call camping in the left lane. And this actually is a ticketable offense in select areas. The state of Arizona is actually starting to ticket people for camping in the left lane because it's more dangerous to pass somebody and go around them on the right side, because somebody could be coming into the highway from an auxiliary point. So on the road that I'm on, if I'm going to be driving out into the right side to get around people, there are a few, not a lot, but a few access points where there is no merge lane or an on-ramp. So there are not lanes where people have to speed up to get onto the road, which means they could pull right in front of you going a lot slower. So people could be pulling onto the highway doing about 10, 15 kilometers an hour, where the flow of traffic on this said roadway is between 80 and 90 kilometers an hour. And they just pulled right in front of me. Well, they're more like a static object, and I'm a movable object. What happens when a movable object hits a static one? Bam, we cause a collision, all because somebody is driving in the left lane. which they are not supposed to do. Now, on a 4-lane road, this starts to change because that lane is what you would consider a through lane. When I'm traveling down one of the main throughways in my city, going up to, let's just say, Costco to, get my cheap hot dog and, stuff for the family. When I'm driving down that road, I travel nearly 8 kilometers down it before I finally have to turn off the road to get into Costco. Well, during rush hour, I don't need to be in the slow lane or the auxiliary lane because there's people coming in and going out. So I could stay in the through lane, which is the left side lane. Yes, it's still considered the fast lane, which means I should be moving faster. But on a 4-lane road, traffic should be all moving at the similar pace compared to a 4-lane highway. So for myself, I am now in what is called the through lane. The left side lane on a 4-lane city street is the through lane. That's what you stay in when you're going through and you don't need to turn off. Now, if you've just turned onto the highway, you should still be in the auxiliary lane. And if you're going to be turning off the highway in about a block or two, then stay in that lane. But if you're going down most of the distance of this roadway, stay off to the left-hand side in the through lane until you reach your point. Now, I'm not saying you could just literally just drive over there and camp in the left-hand lane on a 4-lane road. If there is no traffic in the auxiliary lane, utilize the auxiliary lane in case somebody faster wants to get around you. Still, maintain your 3 points of contact and maintain visibility all around your vehicle. Constantly check all of your mirrors to ensure that nobody behind you is trying to move faster than you. If that's the case, then move out of the through lane into the auxiliary lane and allow people to pass you, because technically it's a 4-lane road and it's still considered a passing lane. Now, if this road becomes bigger and is now 6 lanes, so 3 lanes on either side, the through lane becomes the center lane of the main roadway, because the far left lane is now the passing lane or the left-hand side auxiliary lane for people turning off of the roadway. And you now have a through lane dedicated in the center. This is similar to how it goes on a 4-lane highway, except for the fact on a major expressway, the through lane is not always the center lane. The through lane is essentially the faster moving vehicles that are going straight through, but the furthest left lane would be the dedicated passing lane because nobody can turn off left from a limited access highway. That's just the passing lane. But when you are driving in the through lane or even the auxiliary lane and you need to make a left-hand turn off of the roadway, if you live in a city like I do, where most major throughways actually have what we call a center lane. Now, the center lane between this roadway is a two-way turning lane. Now, here's the issue that I always find, and I found ever since starting to drive. I've always had problems with people who drive in the center lane, who utilize it as a merge lane. Now, we're going to get into merge lanes a little bit later, but the center lane is not a merge lane. The center lane is for you to turn off of the roadway in. It doesn't mean drive down it for half a kilometer until you get to where you're going. It doesn't mean pull from the side of the road from your access point onto the roadway, crossing the flow of traffic into the center lane and drive down it until you get a free spot. No, that's not how these lanes work. The center lane, the two-way turning lane, is there for just that, turning. You turn into it and stop until you can turn out of it. Doesn't matter if you've crossed traffic or you need to cross traffic. You're supposed to be stopped in the lane before you exit. You don't drive down it. And I hate people that do this. One of my dad's good friends still does this. To this day, he still uses it as what you would call a merge lane. So what is a merge lane? Well, a merge lane is one of those little lanes on the side of the road. They're very similar to what you would call a highway on-ramp, but they're more for city usage. These are the small little ramps that they put on in city roads for you to turn onto the roadway. It's for you to go from your road without having to stop. It's to keep the flow of traffic moving. Where a standard 4-lane intersection, you have to come up to it, slow down to turn around it. By putting these merge lanes in, you're keeping the flow of traffic at a steady pace, which means if the roadway is doing 60 kilometers and you're coming from road A and you have to turn right to go onto road B, you use your merge lane. You access the ramp, use the merge lane, and maintain 60 kilometers an hour and turn onto road B. You don't stop on it. That's the biggest problem I always have with merge lanes. You don't stop on it at all, okay? A merge lane is not a yield lane. You don't have to yield the right of way to traffic. You need to find an opening and move into it. Like I said, merge lanes are put in place to keep the flow of traffic moving. And why do you want this? Because you want the flow of traffic to constantly move throughout the city. Because when it has to slow down at an intersection, it creates bottlenecks. It backs up traffic behind it, and during rush hour, causes more headaches. Now, if you live in a major city like a downtown core, you probably don't find a lot of these merge lanes or ramps. Out in the suburbs or in smaller towns, you will find them. And you'll even find them being utilized as highway on-ramps as well when you're in 2-lane highways in backcountry. Now, next to these, smaller ramps, which don't give you a full lane. They don't break off from the road on its own lane and don't enter the road on its own lane. It's just a broken ramp. Instead of having to go from curb to curb, you take this ramp around it. Those are what you would call a yield lane. And what's the difference with a yield lane from a merge? A yield lane, you don't have any access point or any runway to access the roadway, which means you have to turn into it. And if there's another vehicle coming, you have to stop because you utilize it like a yield. A yield sign is not a stop sign. I don't know how many times I've found people like that. They see a yield and they stop when there's no other traffic coming. Yield means to enter the intersection at a cautionary measure. It means you do not have to come to a complete stop. Just use caution while entering the road. You look to see if anybody else is coming. If nobody else is coming, just keep going. Where on like a ramp, you can literally just keep going at your steady pace. Yield lane, you have to slow down for. You slow down to see if the coast is clear to access that roadway. So yes, there is a difference between a merge lane and a yield lane. Now, another place you'll find what you call merge lanes is on the highway. On a limited access highway, when you're coming from a standard city road and trying to access the highway, you'll have what is called an acceleration lane or a deceleration lane. A lot of people will call these the ramps, an on-ramp and an off-ramp. Essentially what they are, especially even when you're on a major highway and you're going from highway to highway, they have ramps between the two of them. But when you're entering from a side road, this on-ramp is an acceleration lane, and you're supposed to utilize it to move yourself up. They bank these ramps and make it so easy for you to drive on them that you don't need to slow down. Most hated thing that I see a lot, especially since I have to use ramps getting off the highway and coming into my house area, are the yellow signs on ramps. Yellow are cautionary signs. On a ramp, it is cautionary that an average person should be doing 40 or 50 kilometers around it. If you go faster, you're not going to get a ticket. It's a cautionary sign. So a lot of people, you need to get it out of their head. Now, off-ramps a lot of times have these because you need to slow down. And off-ramps can be 90 to 180 degree corners. So you need to tell people to slow down. You do need to slow down. But an off-ramp, you're not supposed to slow down until you are fully in the lane, which means when you're moving out of the auxiliary lane, you should not be slowing down anybody in the auxiliary lane while you're exiting the highway. You should turn into the off-ramp or the deceleration lane before you hit your brakes. Anybody who does that, who literally starts hitting the brakes before they turn off, you're just an asshole. I'm sorry. I'm going to say it right now. You're an asshole. You don't brake on a highway before you turn off. The deceleration lane or off-ramp is long enough for you to brake in. It's long enough. Like seriously, I've gotten off a lot of these things, and you could be on a big highway where the average flow of traffic is doing like 120 kilometers an hour, and I go to get off in the deceleration lane. I get into the lane, fully into the lane, and then I slowly start hitting my brake. The people who brake on the highway are the people who ride their brakes. They're the ones who brake for like 2 kilometers to come to a complete stop, which is another thing like that I can get into, but I'm not going to get into because we're talking about lanes today. You enter the lane before you slow down. And it's a similar aspect with on-ramps or acceleration lanes. You speed up in the lane. And like I said, on-ramps from a highway or even from a road onto them are usually banked at a rate that you can increase your speed on. Even those like 180 ones, you could start increasing your speed on them. And by the time you get to straight right next to the road, you're supposed to hit your gas. And if the highway is moving at 110 kilometers an hour, you have to get your car up to 110 kilometers an hour minimum before you exit that off-ramp. before you leave the acceleration lane, you need to be at the speed of the highway. So all those pieces of shit people that you always find when you're traveling down the highway who pull onto the highway doing 70 kilometers an hour when the flow of traffic during rush hour is doing 115 are improperly using those lanes. And really, those people should be ticketed for doing that because they're the ones going to be causing an accident, not the person that's going 5 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. But if you want to hear more about that, you have to go back and listen to our podcast about Don't Slow Down, where when you really realize that it's mostly not the person who's speeding on the highway that causes the accident. It's the person going slower, entering a lane they should not be entering. And people entering from the acceleration lane and not speeding up, I'm sorry, but they should be ticketed. They're not properly utilizing the lane as it is written into the educational system for driver education. They are not entering the highway at the highway speed. Freaking hate those people. And when you're entering it, you're entering what you call it the slow lane or auxiliary lane because you can enter and exit from that lane. It's specific. It's supposed to be the one that's not moving as fast as the other two main lanes. But while you're in the auxiliary lane, if you're going to be turning off in another kilometer and you decide to get into that lane just before, if somebody's trying to enter the highway and there is nobody beside you, you are supposed to move over to allow that driver into the roadway. So you're doing 100 kilometers an hour in the auxiliary lane. They've gotten up next to you and they're doing their 100 kilometers an hour. And there's a lane beside you with nobody in it. You're supposed to move over to allow the other driver to enter the highway. I don't care that you're going to be turning off at the next exit and it's a kilometer up the road. Get out of the fucking lane and let the people in. There's nothing more annoying when you have to either push your gas straight through the floor to get faster than the person who won't move out of the auxiliary lane, or you got to slam on your brakes so you can get behind them. What did the person in the auxiliary lane nearly do? They nearly caused an accident because of their incompetence of properly utilizing the lanes on the roadway. And trust me, many of you listening to this right now, especially if you're listening to this while you're driving, which I know some of you are, have you seen anybody do that today? Any of the stuff we talked about, have you seen happen today? Have you seen somebody driving in the center turn lane? Have you seen people entering the highway at a slower rate of speed? Have you had people brake in front of you? It's annoying. Now, while you're on the highway, there are a lot of other weird dedicated lanes, especially if you're in the city. If you're on an expressway in the city, you'll find a lot of these different lanes. You'll find the carpooling, or as they call it, the high occupancy vehicle lane, where you can get 2 or more people into it. Now, these lanes, I'm going to point this out to a lot of people out there. These lanes are made for people, especially buses, that have a multitude of other people in them, and that's all they're used for. They're not high-speed lanes because they're the furthest left lane over. No, an HOV lane is not a drag strip. It is not. So if the flow of traffic is doing 120 and you pull into it because you want to do 160, no, stay in the other lanes, because the HOV lane is for people who are all traveling together. Now they have to maintain their flow, which means they need to maintain a proper flow within traffic. So you can't have people in the HOV lane who are doing 90 kilometers an hour on 110 kilometer an hour highway. No. If you're going to do that, go over and sit in the other auxiliary lane, because the HOV lane isn't for you. The HOV lane was dedicated for people to carpool and get to work quicker. So during rush hour, these lanes usually aren't jam-packed like the rest of the highway. So they'd like to reward people for carpooling. You ever notice that you find a lot of buses in that lane in the morning? The other 3 lanes of the highway will be jam-packed, and the HOV lane will be moving. Well, as you're a single person sitting in your car in traffic, you're watching the 2 people over there who are carpooling together get to work faster than you. It's supposed to entice you to not drive all the time. I always love it when I go to my in-laws because I'm going down with the kids or with my wife and I could just hop in that lane and be a lot more comfortable. I don't have people flying in and out in front of me because the HOV lanes are a lot more set up for proper flow. But next to that, on the major highways, you'll find what you can call dedicated bus lanes, dedicated transport lanes. Hell, some of them will even have dedicated motorcycle lanes. But when the big 4-lane highway starts to die out and you start moving on to the 2-lane highway. Okay, let's take a step back here. Edit. So also on the 4-lane highways, you'll have what they call on the side of the road a hard shoulder. Now, this is something that's more inclined to be found on expressways than any standard roadways. Even 2-lane highways usually don't have them. They have soft shoulders. The hard shoulder is what you would call the emergency breakdown lane. They usually have them on one side or sometimes both sides of the highway. But these are also utilized for emergency vehicles. It's a lane dedicated on the roadway. So when there's an accident during rush hour and the whole highway is jam-packed, an emergency vehicle can still get to save those people. They don't have to come up the wrong way on the roadway and put themselves in major danger. They can literally drive on the hard shoulder. But like I said, it's also used for emergencies as well. Your vehicle breaks down, you get a flat tire, blah, 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 blah. Hell, police use it when they pull people over because essentially it's the only easy access pullover lane on a highway as well. It'd actually be better if they pulled off the road and went to a parking lot, but if you try and do that, some police might constitute that as you're trying to run from them, and then you'll get ticketed with much more than just speeding, evading police. So just pull onto the hard shoulder. And like I said, the hard shoulder disappears when the 2-lane highway arrives. Now, the 2-lane highway will start to arrive at the end of the 4-lane highway. And as I come up to my main city, because our 4-lane highway hasn't been completed, even though it's been 60 years in the making, it's still not to my home city, which is kind of odd because on a Canadian scale, my home city provides more for our country than a lot of other cities of comparable sizes. But we're not getting into that. So when I enter the 2-lane highway, then I enter what I call the annoyance. 2-lane highways aren't as safe as a broken freeway style. You don't have an island in the center to keep you from getting hit head on from other vehicles. No, you don't have that. In some certain areas, you'll have what you call the 3rd-lane highways, where the 3rd lane, which is a dedicated passing lane, will move in and out from side to side, and the center of the roadway will still be considered a limited access roadway. This is to provide safe access for people in areas that don't require a fully dedicated limited access throughway. We're actually building one in Northern Ontario right now, going up towards Temiskaming Shores, where if you don't know where that is, look up Electra Battery, the only cobalt refinery in all of North America, which finally got funding, not from our government, from the American government. God bless you guys for fucking helping us out, considering the fact that the Ontario government just shits on us all the time. They finally got their money. Well, they have more trucks and more people moving up that highway all the time, and it is dangerous as a 2-lane highway. And like they always say, well, there's a few passing lanes. Well, if you've ever driven on a 2-lane highway, passing lanes are more what I like to call drag strips. Because when you're on a 2-lane highway, there is no fast lane, slow lane, okay? But when a passing lane opens up, there actually is what you would call a slow lane and the passing lane. Now, the slow lane is intended, the most right lane on a 2-lane road with a passing lane. The most right lane is intended for the people who are moving slower before the passing lane to maintain the speed they were doing and allow the faster vehicles to move past them. My biggest problem with these lanes is when you travel Highway 69 coming towards Sudbury, Ontario, people like to speed up on passing lanes. I don't know how many times I've gotten stuck behind some asshole doing 75 or 80. The highway's 90 kilometers an hour is maximum speed, and they're doing 75 or 80. The second the passing lane shows up, they're doing 110 just because they feel a little bit safer. So why did you increase your speed? You are not supposed to increase your speed. If you're the one who has 2 kilometers of traffic stuck behind you, when you hit the passing lane, you don't touch your gas pedal. You maintain the speed you were doing and allow the faster vehicles to move past you. How many times this aggravates me? And as we talked about in our average driver, this creates aggression amongst all the other drivers on the road, which means you're going to cause road rage and eventually cause an accident. And who are the police going to blame? The guy who is speeding. Well, the guy like me who speeds and has to go up to like 135, 140 kilometers an hour to get past a vehicle that was in front of me doing 80 kilometers an hour in the 90 zone before a passing lane. I am not the danger on the highway. You might think so because of how fast I'm traveling, which may constitute as you being partially correct only due to my speed. But I shouldn't have to do 140 kilometers an hour to get past somebody who's doing 80 kilometers an hour before the passing lane. When I hit that passing lane, I should only have to speed up to 90 90 kilometers an hour to get by them easily. But no, they all decide to speed up, and I freaking got to put my license and my vehicle on the line. And the worst thing is, most of these people, when they get to the end of the passing lane, they'll slow right back down to their 75 or 80 kilometers an hour, improperly utilizing the passing lane. Ugh, my most hated. Ugh. But when I finally get close to home and the road starts becoming a 4-lane highway and then a 4-lane roadway with a center turn lane, I start getting the ramps again. And then we start getting what we call the dedicated turn lane or transfer lanes. I have one of these going to the reserve near my place, and tons of people go out and get smoked. This transfer lane or dedicated turning lane is half a kilometer long, and yet every single day I'll find people who are driving 20 under the speed limit and they wait until the very last second to turn in. These are the turn lanes that use a white broken line to distinguish them between the center turn lane, which is yellow. These are dedicated transfer lanes to move you off of a select roadway. When those lanes open up, you need to move into them. You don't wait until the last minute. You turn into them when they open. And like I said before, they're like the deceleration lane. You get into the lane before you slow down. I don't know how many times I could stress that. Get into the lane, then slow down. Even with center turn lanes, get into the lane, hit your brakes, because center turn lanes are usually on roadways that never exceed 80 kilometers an hour. Okay, so you can brake a lot quicker than you can when you're on the highway doing about a 110. One of my other favorite ones from highways that actually we used to have on one of our major roadways in town here when I was younger is what you would call a slip lane. These are cool ones, and they usually only happen at 3-way intersections. You will have a dedicated throughway lane at the top part of the intersection, which never gets a traffic light attached to it. It constantly moves. There is no lights. There is nothing else. It'll either be one of the lanes that goes straight through, or it will be a new lane that opens up to go around the intersection. But you do not have to slow down in this lane. These things are pretty cool, and they actually used to have one in Perry Sound when it was a 2-lane highway. They did this for the northbound lane just so we didn't have to slow down for all the traffic trying to turn in and go to Perry Sound. It was pretty cool. Sometimes you'll find these with bridges, but a lot of times, mostly 3-way intersection. They're neat lanes. Another neat lane that you'll find, and you'll find this a lot in like tunnels or across specific bridges, and I found my first, not first, but one of the most memorable ones I remember is going across the Lions Gate Bridge in Vancouver, BC. If you don't know where BC is, check a map, okay? The Lions Gate Bridge is 3 lanes. It seems kind of weird. There are 3 driving lanes. So in the morning, 2 lanes come into the park from the Bay Area and only 1 lane goes out because rush hour is moving to downtown. At the end of the day, rush hour is moving out of downtown and 2 lanes are heading northbound across the bridge. Reversible lanes are utilized for rush hour instances. So they're usually utilized on 4-lane or multiple lane roadways where you can easily change the lanes out. And they do this to keep the flow of traffic and keep an increased flow of traffic moving. You'll even find them on 4-lane roads where during rush hour, they'll give you an extra 3rd lane to get that traffic out of downtown a lot quicker without creating bottlenecks. It's an amazing idea, but a lot of places don't want to utilize them because when you need to go and change those lanes, some people get caught off guard. Next to this, you'll find a multitude of other lanes out into the world. Toll lanes, bike lanes, motorcycle lanes, bus lanes, fire lanes, loading zones, parking lanes. Hell, you'll have those emergency lanes as you're coming through the mountains, where the transports, if their brakes fail, they can go up it without causing an accident. Climbing lanes. This is something I see in Northern Ontario a lot. They utilize passing lanes going up a hill, but they do that so the transport can move over and you can pass them. But they also have these dedicated lanes on highways as well, like big limited access highways. They'll have a dedicated lane for the transports or slower vehicles to go into as you're climbing the hill. It's actually a pretty ingenious idea. Then you get your on-ramps, your off-ramps, your driving lane, your auxiliary lanes. There's a multitude of different lanes out in the world. The only great thing with a multitude of different lanes out in the world is at some point we all have to use them and we all have to know how to drive in them. Now, if I've taught you anything during this podcast, maybe a few more of you will understand what you're doing wrong with specific lanes. Are you one of those people who merge in the center turn lane? Are you a person who camps in the left lane? Are you a person that enters a highway not at highway speeds or brakes before they enter the off-ramp? Hell, are you my most hated person out there? The asshole who speeds up on a passing lane. What is wrong with you? It is not made for you to speed up. lanes. We all learn about it, and we all have to write about them at one point in time. Unfortunately, most of us get too complacent in our driving skills, don't do any research, and don't understand that what we are doing is actually wrong on the roadway. Maybe it's time we all just open that book and read about the different lanes on the roadway. So if you like this podcast, please like, share, or comment about it on any of the major social feeds or streaming sites that you've found us on. The AutoLooks podcast is available on every major streaming site from around the globe, from iTunes to Spotify and even Amazon. You can find the AutoLooks podcast on. So click the like button at the bottom, share us, and tell your friends, tell your family, tell your boss down the road, tell your horrible neighbor that you don't like about the AutoLooks podcast. Maybe they are one of those most hated people on the highway. And maybe they'll learn something. Kind of like the fact that cruise control, when you're driving, unless you hit the brakes, the car will speed back up without you doing anything. Oh, imagine that. Oh, technology. So send it to your friends, send it to your family, give us a like. And after that, stop by the website. Stop by AutoLooks.net. Read some of the reviews, check out the ratings, and go to the Corporate Links website page. Big or small, we have them all on the AutoLooks.net website. The AutoLooks podcast is brought to you by Ecom Entertainment Group and distributed by Podbeam.com. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email over at email@AutoLooks.net. So for myself, Everett J, the Ecom Entertainment Group, strap yourself in for this one fun, wild ride that the lanes of the world are going to take us on.